By 3:12 that afternoon, I had already checked my phone 6 times. Not because I was waiting for anything dramatic, just something small, a text, a forgotten cake kind of message, a dry little happy birthday from my mother. Maybe a heart from my sister Lauren. Even a last-minute call with background noise and no real warmth behind it would have counted for something. I was 34 years old, sitting in my office in downtown Charlotte, staring at a screen full of numbers I normally could have untangled in my sleep, and all I could think was this: how do people who say they love you forget you so easily? The building around me hummed with late afternoon noise. Printers, elevator dings, somebody laughing too loudly down the hall. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept lifting it anyway, like muscle memory could cover the ache. At 3:17, I opened the family group chat. There were only 3 people in it: me, my mother, and Lauren. The last message was from 2 weeks earlier, when Mom had asked whether I could move a little extra before the weekend, because Lauren had a lot going on. I stared at the empty text box for a long time. Then I typed, "Sadly, I guess no one remembered my birthday." I looked at the message before sending it. It wasn't angry. That was the part that stayed with me later. It wasn't sharp or dramatic, or designed to guilt anyone. It was just true. I hit send. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the typing bubble appeared. My chest tightened. Mom replied, "Stop contacting us, we need distance from you." I read it once, then again, and before my mind had even caught up to what I was seeing, Lauren reacted to the message with a heart. A heart. Not to me, to that. I sat there so still I could hear the air vent above my desk. I remember noticing how the late sun hit the glass of the framed degree on my wall. I remember the exact sound my phone made when the screen dimmed in my hand. That was my birthday. Not a call. Not a card. Not even indifference. A dismissal. And the strangest part was, even then, they still had no idea what they had just done. Because my mother and sister thought they were pushing away the difficult daughter, the overly serious one, the one who always made things uncomfortable by noticing too much. What they didn't understand was that I was also the person who signed off on everything. The house, the cars, the personal accounts, the trust distributions, the polished life they moved through so effortlessly. All of it touched my desk before it touched their hands. So I looked at my phone one last time, opened my settings, and blocked both of them. Then I froze the money. If respect matters, subscribe. And before I tell you what happened the next morning, you should know this story didn't begin on my 34th birthday. It started years earlier, when I learned that in my family, being useful was never the same thing as being loved. The strange thing about being the responsible daughter is that no one ever announces the role. It just happens. One day you're the kid who remembers where the spare house key is. Then you're the teenager filling out forms your parents forgot to sign. Then suddenly you're 24 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office after your father's funeral, listening to grown adults explain why everything might collapse if you don't step in. That was the first time I realized the quiet daughter had somehow become the one holding the whole structure together. My father, Daniel Carter, built Carter Development from a 2-truck landscaping operation into one of the most reliable, mid-size commercial builders in North Carolina. Nothing flashy. Just steady contracts, apartment complexes, retail centers, and the occasional city project. People trusted him. But cancer doesn't care about stability. When he died, the company was deep in debt from 2 stalled projects and a loan he had taken out during the last year of his illness. Mom didn't understand any of it. And Lauren didn't want to. Lauren was 19 then, beautiful, charming, and allergic to anything that required spreadsheets. I had just finished business school, so I stepped in. At first it was temporary, just helping sort paperwork, calling lenders, sitting in meetings where older men spoke slowly, like I might break if they used normal volume. Then months passed. I renegotiated 2 loans, consolidated supplier contracts, sold a piece of land Dad had been holding too long. By the end of that year, Carter Development wasn't drowning anymore. By year 3, it was profitable. And somewhere during that climb, My title quietly became Chief Financial Officer. But titles can be funny things in families. In the business world, CFO meant I controlled budgets, investments, debt strategy, payroll, everything that moved through the company financially. At home, it meant something else entirely. It meant I was the one who handled the money. Every month, on the 1st, I transferred $7,500 into my mother's personal account. Another $3,000 went to Lauren. Their car leases were attached to company credit lines. The house they lived in, a 5-bedroom rental in a gated neighborhood, was paid through a property expense account I approved every quarter. Vacations, spa memberships, designer shopping trips Lauren described as self-care. All of it ran through systems I managed. At first, I didn't question it. Dad had always taken care of everyone. It felt natural to keep doing that. The first few years after he passed, I told myself Mom was grieving. Lauren was still young. Things would balance out eventually. Grief would soften. People would notice. Someone might even say thank you. But gratitude never arrived. Instead, the phone calls came when something was late. Emily, the transfer didn't come through yet. Or Lauren's favorite. Hey, quick thing, my card declined and I'm literally at checkout. No one ever called just to ask how the company was doing. Or how I was doing. And birthdays. Well, birthdays had quietly stopped existing a long time ago. My father had been the only one who remembered them properly. He used to bake my cake himself. Terrible frosting. Way too sweet. He'd write, "Happy birthday, kiddo," in crooked letters, and pretend he hadn't practiced on parchment paper first. The last cake he made me was when I turned 23. A year later, he was gone. And after that, my birthday just became another Tuesday. If you know what it's like to slowly become invisible in your own family, you probably understand why I didn't say anything about it for years. I kept working, kept fixing, kept transferring money every month like clockwork. Because part of me believed that if I held everything together long enough, eventually they'd look up and realize I had been there the whole time. But 3 weeks before my 34th birthday, something happened that made me realize something much harder. They had never been looking. And what I found that night made it impossible to keep pretending they were. That discovery started with a message my sister never meant for me to see. The message arrived on a Tuesday night at 11:42 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was still at the office, reviewing projections for a retail complex we were financing outside Raleigh. My eyes were tired, the kind of tired that comes from staring at numbers too long. My phone buzzed on the desk. Lauren's name popped up. That alone was unusual. Lauren didn't text me unless something had gone wrong with one of her credit cards or she needed money moved somewhere quickly. But this message was different. It was a forwarded screenshot. No explanation. No, oops, no context. Just an image. At first glance, it looked like a normal group chat conversation. My mother's name was there. Lauren's too. A few messages stacked on top of each other. Then I noticed something strange. I wasn't in it. The group name at the top read, Family Strategy. My stomach tightened. Because the only family group chat I knew about had 3 people in it. Mom, Lauren, and me. This one had only 2. I opened the screenshot and zoomed in. Mom, we should talk about selling some company shares. Lauren, do we need to involve Emily? Mom, not yet. She just handles paperwork anyway. I felt my fingers go cold. Lauren replied, She's going to get weird about it. You know how she is. Mom responded almost instantly. Emily has always been difficult, too serious, no social sense. A few seconds later, Lauren added, Honestly, she acts like she runs everything. Mom replied with a laughing emoji. Then another message appeared under it. Sweetheart, you're the one with real business instincts, just like your grandmother. I stared at the screen for a long time. 10 years. 10 years of late nights rebuilding the company after Dad died. 10 years of negotiating loans, closing deals, restructuring contracts, keeping payroll stable during downturns. 10 years of signing every check that funded their lives. And according to my own family, I handled paperwork. The office around me was quiet now. Most people had gone home. Cleaning staff moved slowly down the hallway outside my door. I read the messages again. Then I noticed something else. At the top of the screenshot was a calendar reminder Lauren had accidentally captured. Saturday, March 15. Meeting about shares. March 15. My birthday. They were planning a meeting about selling part of my father's company. On my birthday. Without telling me. Without even realizing the date meant anything to me. For a moment, anger tried to rise, hot and immediate. But it didn't stay. Instead, something colder settled in its place. Clarity. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet understanding. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my office. The framed development plans on the wall. The contract binders stacked neatly beside my desk. Everything I had built over the last decade was right here. And apparently, in my mother's mind, I was just the girl who filed paperwork. If you've ever worked yourself into exhaustion hoping someone would finally recognize your effort, you know the strange moment when the truth finally lands. Not with fireworks. Just with a quiet thought. Oh, they were never going to see it. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through the screenshot one more time. Lauren must have meant to send it to someone else, maybe one of her friends. Instead, she sent it to me. And she never even realized. Sometimes the truth doesn't come through confrontation. Sometimes it arrives through a mistake. And once you've seen it clearly, there's no going back to the version of the story you were telling yourself before. That night, I went home and did something I should have done years earlier. I opened my laptop, and I started adding up every dollar I had ever transferred to my family. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, a calculator beside it, and 10 years of bank statements pulled up on the screen. At first, I told myself I was only checking something small, just confirming a few transfers. But once you start looking closely at numbers, they tend to tell the truth whether you want them to or not. The first column was Mom. $7,500 every month. 12 months a year. 10 years. I typed the numbers into the calculator. $900,000. I stared at the total for a moment before moving to the next column. Lauren. $3,000 every month. That one came to $360,000. Then there were the extras. The house rental, $11,800 a month for the place in Glenwood Hills. Lauren's Mercedes lease. 2 credit cards attached to the company account. Emergency transfers. Vacation deposits. Short-term loans that were never repaid. By the time I finished adding everything together, the number on my screen read just under $1. $8 million. I leaned back in the chair slowly. Not angry. Just stunned. Nearly $2 million had flowed out of my hands into their lives over the last decade. And yet the last text my mother sent me said, "Stop contacting us." The quiet in the apartment felt heavier now. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought about my dad. He used to sit at our old kitchen table with stacks of contracts spread everywhere, explaining how cash flow worked, how companies survived on careful decisions. "Numbers tell the truth," he'd say. "People can hide things, numbers can't." Tonight the numbers were telling me something I had avoided admitting for a long time. I wasn't supporting my family. I was sustaining a system that erased me. And the moment I stopped feeding it, everything would change. I closed the laptop and looked at my phone on the table. There was one name in my contacts I hadn't called in years. Thomas Green. Dad's attorney. His closest friend during the final years of his illness. Every year since Dad passed away, Thomas sent a short message on the anniversary of his death. "Just checking in, Emily." I always replied politely. But we had never really talked. Until that night. My thumb hovered over the call button for a few seconds. Something in my chest told me that if I pressed it, the next chapter of my life would begin, whether I was ready or not. So I took a breath and made the call. Thomas Green answered on the second ring. Emily? His voice carried the same calm steadiness I remembered from years ago. It was the kind of voice that didn't rush to fill silence, which somehow made it easier to speak. Hi, Thomas, I said. Sorry for calling so late. You never have to apologize for that, he replied gently. I was wondering when you might call. That made me pause. You were expecting me? There was a short silence on the other end. Not awkward, just thoughtful. In a way, he said, your father believed this day would eventually come. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. What day? The day you finally started asking questions. The words landed softly, but they hit something deep inside me. I glanced down at the closed laptop on the table. I found something tonight, I said quietly. Messages between my mom and Lauren. They're planning to discuss selling company shares. Without me. Thomas let out a slow breath. I see. And apparently, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady, they think I just handle paperwork. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he said something that made my heart skip. Emily, have you ever read the full ownership documents your father left behind? I signed them years ago when everything transferred, I said. But I never really studied them. That's what I thought. Another pause. Your father left instructions with me before he passed, Thomas said carefully. He asked me to wait until you came to me on your own before explaining certain things. The room suddenly felt very quiet. What things? A letter, he said. A letter? Yes. I could almost hear him choosing his words. He wrote it for you 6 months before he died. He believed you would need it someday. Not immediately, but when the truth about your family became impossible to ignore. My pulse started to rise. Why didn't you give it to me before? Because he made me promise not to, Thomas said softly. He said if I showed it to you too early, you wouldn't believe it. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process that. So he knew, I murmured. He suspected, Thomas corrected gently. Your father was a perceptive man. My eyes drifted toward the window. The city lights outside shimmered faintly in the dark. What does the letter say? I asked. I think that's something you should read yourself. Do you have it? I've had it for 10 years. 10 years. Waiting. Thomas continued. I can bring it to you tomorrow if you'd like. For the first time since that screenshot appeared on my phone, I felt something other than hurt. Curiosity. Maybe even hope. Yes, I said quietly. Please bring it. All right, he replied. Tomorrow evening. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the silent phone in my hand. Because suddenly the story I thought I understood about my family didn't feel complete anymore. And part of me had the strange feeling that my father had been preparing me for this moment long before I ever realized it. What I didn't know yet was that the next day would also be March 15th, my 34th birthday. And before that day ended, everything my mother and sister believed about control, money, and power was about to collapse. March 15 started quietly. No alarms, no rushing. Just the soft gray light of early morning slipping through the curtains of my apartment. For a few seconds after waking up, I forgot what day it was. Then the memory returned. My birthday. 34. I lay there for a moment, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside. Normally, I would already be checking emails, scanning overnight reports from the finance team, mentally sorting through the day ahead. But that morning felt different, heavier somehow, like the air itself knew something important was about to happen. I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. Work was easy, numbers were predictable, contracts didn't pretend to care about you and then quietly erase you from the room. By noon, I had already cleared half the day's tasks. And still, my phone remained silent. No call from Mom. No message from Lauren. Not even a quick social media tag or a lazy emoji. The absence itself felt familiar. Birthdays in my family had stopped meaning anything years ago. But this year, After everything I had discovered, the silence felt sharper. At 12:47 p.m., I picked up my phone. The family group chat stared back at me. 3 names at the top: Mom, Lauren, Emily. I hesitated for a few seconds. Part of me considered saying nothing at all, just letting the day pass quietly the way it had every year since Dad died. But another part of me wanted to know, not because I expected anything anymore, just because I needed to see the truth clearly. So I typed a simple message. Today's my birthday. Did anyone remember? I read it twice. No accusation. No drama. Just a question. Then I pressed send and set the phone down on the counter. Minutes passed. I rinsed my coffee mug, checked my email, reviewed a construction payment schedule. Still nothing. At 2:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. My chest lifted slightly before I could stop it. Mom's name appeared on the screen. I opened the message. And there it was. 11 words that somehow erased 3 decades of family history. Stop contacting us. We need distance from you. I read the message again slowly, as if my brain might rearrange the words into something less cold. But they didn't change. Then another notification appeared. Lauren had reacted. A small red heart icon appeared under Mom's message. My sister had liked the text telling me to disappear. For a long moment, I just stood there in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. A car passed outside. Life moved forward like nothing had happened. And strangely enough, something inside me became very calm. Because that message did something years of small disappointments never managed to do. It ended the question. No more wondering if I was imagining things. No more explaining their behavior away. No more hoping that one day they would notice me standing there. They had finally said it clearly. So I opened my phone settings. Found Mom's contact. Blocked it. Then Lauren's. Blocked that too. The screen went quiet. I set the phone down on the counter and exhaled slowly. For the first time in a very long time, I stopped trying to hold my family together. Blocking them was quiet. No dramatic music. No shaking hands. No last, angry message. Just 2 taps. Contact block caller. And suddenly, the silence in my apartment felt cleaner. For a few minutes I stood at the kitchen counter staring at my phone, half expecting it to vibrate anyway, like somehow the universe would override the settings and force everything back to normal. But nothing happened. The screen stayed dark. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and checked the time. 4:02 p.m. Thomas Green was supposed to arrive at 6 with my father's letter. That left me nearly 2 hours. 2 hours where the house was quiet and my mind refused to be. So I did what I always do when something emotional threatens to spill over. I opened my laptop. The Carter Development Financial Dashboard appeared on the screen. Revenue projections, loan schedules, payroll timelines, numbers I had looked at almost every day for the last decade. But this time, I wasn't opening the usual reports. Instead, I navigated somewhere I rarely visited. Ownership structure. The file loaded slowly. I had signed these documents years ago after Dad passed away. At the time, everything felt like a blur. Lawyers, paperwork, bank approvals, emergency meetings with lenders. I trusted Thomas. I trusted Dad. So I signed where they told me to sign. But I had never really studied the details. Now I did. The document listed the shareholders of Carter Development. Daniel Carter's estate had been divided into 3 portions. Emily Carter, 60%. Patricia Carter, 20%. Lauren Carter, 20%. I already knew that part. What I hadn't fully processed was what came next. Under governance authority, it clearly stated, majority shareholder retains primary financial control and sole signatory authority for trust distributions and corporate financial instruments. I leaned closer to the screen. Sole signatory authority, meaning nothing moved without my approval. Not the family trust. Not the distributions. Not the accounts funding my mother's house. Not the credit cards attached to Lauren's spending. Every dollar passed through systems I controlled. For 10 years, I had treated that power like a responsibility I owed the family. But legally, it wasn't an obligation. It was a choice. I sat back in my chair slowly, because suddenly something became very clear. Mom and Lauren had sent that message believing they were pushing away the inconvenient daughter. The overly serious one. The one who handled paperwork. They had no idea that every part of their lifestyle depended on the woman they had just told to disappear. And I hadn't even touched the financial controls yet. Not a single change. Not a freeze. Nothing. The realization didn't make me feel powerful. If anything, it made me feel strangely sad. Because it meant the truth had been sitting right in front of me for years. I had just refused to look at it. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip behind the buildings across the street, turning the sky a pale orange. I closed the document and shut the laptop. 2 hours earlier, my family had told me they needed distance. And I had respected that. But what they didn't understand yet was that distance works both ways. And before the night was over, the first ripple of that distance was about to reach them. Thomas Green arrived at exactly 6:03 p.m. That was another thing I remembered about him from years ago. He was never early, never late, just quietly precise. When I opened the door, he gave me the same small, steady smile he always had. "Emily," he said warmly. "Happy birthday." For a moment I didn't know what to say. It had been so long since anyone in my family remembered that the words almost felt unfamiliar. "Thank you," I said softly. He stepped inside, removing his coat, and glanced around the apartment. I had moved here 3 years earlier after selling the house I'd shared with an ex-boyfriend. The place was simple, clean lines, neutral colors, large windows overlooking the city. Nothing extravagant. Thomas nodded approvingly, like he always did when he saw something practical. Then he reached into the leather briefcase he carried and pulled out a long, cream-colored envelope. Even before he handed it to me, I recognized the handwriting. My father's. Neat, careful, slightly slanted to the right. Across the front were 5 simple words. "For Emily when she's ready." My throat tightened. We moved to the kitchen table without speaking much. Thomas poured himself a glass of water while I sat down with the envelope in front of me. For a few seconds I didn't open it. I just ran my fingers across the paper. 10 years. This letter had been waiting 10 years. "You don't have to read it now," Thomas said gently. "Take your time." But I already knew I wouldn't wait. My hands were steady as I broke the seal. Inside was a folded sheet of thick stationery. My father's handwriting filled both sides. I unfolded it carefully. The first line made my chest tighten. "My dear Emily, if you're reading this, it means something I feared has finally happened." I swallowed and kept reading. "It means you've started to see your mother and Lauren clearly." Thomas sat quietly across from me, giving me space. The words on the page felt strangely alive, like Dad was sitting beside me again at the kitchen table explaining something important. "You've always been the strongest person in this family. Not the loudest, not the most celebrated, but the one who quietly carries more than anyone else." Tears blurred the lines for a moment, but I kept going. "Your mother loves in a way that often looks like preference. Lauren learned early how to live inside that preference. You didn't. You chose responsibility instead." My hands trembled slightly. "I'm leaving the company mostly in your care, not because I want you to sacrifice yourself for the family, but because you are the only one I trust to protect it." Then came the sentence that made me stop breathing for a second. "And more importantly, I'm giving you the power to protect yourself." I read that line again slowly. Thomas shifted in his chair but didn't interrupt. The letter continued. "If the day comes when your loyalty is used against you, remember this. You do not owe anyone unlimited access to your strength. Not even family." The room felt very quiet. For the first time that day, the tears came without resistance. Not loud crying, just a slow, steady release. My father had seen it. All of it. Years before I was ready to admit it myself. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table. Thomas finally spoke. Your father knew you would hold everything together for as long as you could, he said gently. I wiped my eyes and looked up. He also knew, Thomas continued, that eventually you would realize holding everything together was breaking you. I took a deep breath. Across the room, my phone sat on the kitchen counter. Blocked. Silent. But somehow I had the feeling that silence wasn't going to last much longer. Because somewhere across town, my mother and sister were still living their normal evening. Still spending money. Still assuming everything worked the way it always had. They just didn't know yet that tonight was the last day things would work that way. For a while after reading the letter, neither of us spoke. Thomas sat quietly across the table, hands folded around his glass of water. He understood something most people didn't. Sometimes silence is the most respectful thing you can offer someone. I looked down at the paper again. Dad's handwriting. Every letter exactly the way I remembered from years of watching him sign contracts at the old kitchen table. You said he wrote this 6 months before he died, I said finally. Thomas nodded. He had already started restructuring the company by then. That made me look up. Restructuring? Yes, Thomas said. Ownership, trust authority, financial control. I frowned slightly. But I already knew the shares were 60-20-20. That's only part of it. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out another document, a thin legal file. Your father didn't just divide ownership, he continued. He also created a structure where the majority shareholder holds sole authority over the family trust distributions. I saw that clause earlier today, I said slowly. Thomas studied my expression carefully. Emily, do you know what that actually means in practice? I hesitated. I assumed it meant I approve major changes. Thomas shook his head gently. It means the trust operates entirely under your authorization. I blinked. Your mother and Lauren don't control those accounts, he continued. They never have. I felt my pulse quicken slightly. Every house payment, every credit card extension, every monthly transfer, they exist because you approved them. I stared at him. For 10 years, Thomas added softly. A strange quiet filled the room again. Not the heavy silence from earlier. Something clearer. More focused. So, if I stopped approving them, I said slowly. Thomas met my eyes. Then the accounts would stop distributing funds. The thought hung there between us. I thought about the mansion rental, Lauren's shopping habits, the endless quick transfers that had become normal over the years. And suddenly, I understood something Dad had written in the letter. I'm giving you the power to protect yourself. Not power over them. Power to step away. I exhaled slowly. I don't want to destroy their lives, I said. Thomas nodded immediately. I know. That's not what Dad would have wanted either. You're right, he replied. And he didn't design the system for revenge. He paused. He designed it for boundaries. That word settled deep. Boundaries. Something I had spent most of my life avoiding. Thomas glanced toward the clock on the wall. May I ask you something, Emily? Of course. What are they doing tonight? I gave a small, humorless smile. My sister is celebrating her birthday. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Your sister's birthday? Yes. Thomas tilted his head. I thought Lauren's birthday was in April. It is. His expression slowly shifted as he realized what I meant. They're throwing her a birthday party tonight, I said quietly. In the house I pay for, with people from my professional network. Thomas leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. And you weren't invited? No. Another moment of silence passed. Then he asked carefully, what are you planning to do? I thought about the party happening across town right now. The champagne. The conversations. My mother explaining the business to people who had no idea who actually ran it. And for the first time that evening, I felt something unexpected. Not anger. Clarity. I stood up slowly. I'm going to that party, I said. Thomas looked at me for a moment, then smiled faintly. I had a feeling you might say that. I didn't rush. That surprised even me. If this had happened a year earlier, I probably would have driven across town immediately, fueled by adrenaline and something close to anger. But that night felt different. Calmer. More deliberate. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. Most of the clothes inside were practical work dresses, tailored jackets, neutral colors that made boardrooms easier to navigate. My hand paused on one particular suit. Charcoal gray, perfectly fitted. The one I usually wore for investor meetings. For a moment, I almost laughed to myself. Not a party outfit. A business one. But then again, that party was built on business. I changed slowly, tying my hair back neatly the way I always did before a major negotiation. The small routines helped settle my thoughts. By the time I stepped back into the living room, Thomas was standing near the window. "You're really going," he said. "Yes. Are you planning to confront them?" I shook my head. "No." That part surprised him. "I don't need to," I continued. "I just want to see what they're saying." Thomas studied me for a moment before nodding. "That's probably wiser." He picked up his coat from the chair. "I should mention something," he added casually. "I was invited to that party." I stopped mid-step. "You were?" "Yes. Marcus Whitman asked me to stop by briefly." Marcus Whitman, our largest development partner. The man responsible for almost 30% of Carter Development's current projects. "And my mother invited him?" I asked. Thomas gave a small smile. "I don't believe she understands exactly who handles those contracts." I exhaled quietly. That sounded about right. Mom had always enjoyed the social side of business events, the appearances, the introductions, the polite conversations about growth and partnerships, but she had never bothered with the details. Details were my job. "Does she know you're my attorney?" I asked. Thomas shook his head. "She believes I'm simply company counsel." That small distinction suddenly felt important. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter. "Well," I said, "I guess tonight everyone learns a few new details." Thomas chuckled softly. "You've become a very composed woman, Emily." "Trust me," I replied, slipping on my coat. "This is the composed version." We walked down to the parking garage together. The night air outside carried the faint hum of traffic and distant music from somewhere downtown. For a brief second, I thought about turning around, going back upstairs, spending the rest of my birthday quietly with a glass of wine and my father's letter. But something inside me knew I needed to see this moment through. Not for revenge, not to embarrass anyone, just to witness the truth out in the open. Sometimes clarity only arrives when everyone involved is standing in the same room. Thomas stopped beside his car. "I'll see you there," he said. I nodded. "Drive safe." 10 minutes later, I turned onto the long street that led into Glenwood Hills. Even from a distance, I could already see the lights. Pink balloons framed the entrance of the house. Valet parking lined the driveway. Music drifted into the warm night air. And as I pulled my car toward the curb, one quiet realization settled firmly in my chest. Every light in that house, every glass of champagne, every single detail of that celebration had been paid for by the daughter they told to stop contacting them. The valet barely looked at me when I stepped out of the car. That was fine. Most of the people at Carter Development events didn't recognize my face anyway. They recognized my signature at the bottom of contracts, the quiet emails that solved problems before they became disasters. I walked up the stone path slowly. The house looked exactly the way it always did when Mom hosted something important, warm lights glowing through the tall windows, music drifting into the evening air, laughter spilling out the open front door. Pink and gold balloons framed the entrance. A large banner hung across the living room inside. Even from outside, I could read it. "Happy birthday, Lauren." For a moment, I just stood there. March 15. My birthday. And inside that house, my family was celebrating someone else, using money I had approved 3 days earlier. The strange thing was, I didn't feel angry anymore. Just clear. I stepped inside. The foyer was crowded with people holding champagne glasses and small plates from the catering table. Most of them were familiar faces, developers, investors, people from firms that had worked with Carter Development for years. Some of them nodded politely when they saw me. A few looked confused. I moved through the room quietly until I reached the doorway to the main living area. That's when I saw my mother. Patricia Carter stood in the center of the room like she always did at events. Elegant posture, pearl necklace, one hand resting lightly on Lauren's arm as she spoke to a group of guests. Lauren looked radiant. Pink dress, perfect hair, champagne in hand. For a moment I watched them from the edge of the room. Mom was telling a story. I caught the end of it. And honestly, our older daughter Emily has always been very difficult. She prefers working with numbers instead of people. Several guests murmured politely. Marcus Whitman stood among them, listening carefully. My mother continued, smiling sympathetically. We've had to create some distance for our own peace of mind. It's heartbreaking, of course, but sometimes you have to let people go. A few people nodded. Lauren sipped her champagne and said lightly, Emily never really understood the business side anyway. Something in the room shifted then. Not loudly. Just a slight change in energy. Marcus Whitman's brow furrowed. Wait, he said slowly. Emily Carter? Mom smiled politely. Yes. The Emily Carter who signs our financial agreements? The room went very quiet. I stepped forward. And for the first time that evening, my mother saw me standing there. The color drained from her face. Emily? She whispered. I gave a calm, polite smile. Hi, Mom. Then I glanced around the room. Sorry I'm late to the birthday party. If you're still here listening to this story, take a second and tell me something in the comments. Would you have walked into that room like I did? Or would you have stayed away and protected your peace? And if stories about quiet strength and boundaries mean something to you, remember this. Real power moves in silence. Subscribe. For 3 full seconds, no one spoke. The music continued softly in the background, but the conversations around the room had completely stopped. My mother's eyes moved between my face and the people standing beside her, as if she were trying to rearrange reality quickly enough to make the situation disappear. Emily, what are you doing here? She finally asked. Her voice sounded tight, almost fragile. I kept my tone calm. I'm not contacting you, I said evenly. You asked for distance, remember? I'm simply attending a gathering in a house I help pay for. A few quiet murmurs spread through the room. Lauren stepped forward next, confusion written across her face. Your birthday isn't until next month, she said quickly. I turned toward her. No, I replied gently. Your birthday is next month. Mine is today. The silence thickened. Someone near the back of the room whispered something to a colleague. Marcus Whitman looked from me to my mother, clearly trying to process what he had just heard. Mrs. Carter, he said slowly, I thought you told me your older daughter wasn't involved in the company. Mom opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Lauren jumped in quickly. Emily just handles the paperwork, she said. She doesn't really. That's not correct. The voice came from behind me. Thomas Green stepped forward from the side of the room where he had been standing near the bar. Several guests turned toward him immediately. As legal counsel for Carter Development, Thomas continued calmly. I can confirm that Emily Carter is the company's chief financial officer. The room fell completely silent. Thomas didn't raise his voice. But the next sentence carried across the room like a quiet thunderclap. She also holds 60% of the company shares. My mother's champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. Lauren blinked. And suddenly, everyone in that living room was looking at me very differently. The room stayed quiet long enough for the music to feel out of place. Someone near the dining table lowered the volume slightly, as if instinctively understanding that whatever was happening now had nothing to do with a birthday party anymore. Lauren was the first to speak. That's not, she started, then stopped when she realized every person in the room was watching. Thomas remained calm, hands loosely folded. It's public record, he said evenly. Emily Carter holds the majority share of Carter Development. and maintains sole financial signing authority. A few people exchanged surprised glances. Marcus Whitman looked back at me, the confusion in his face slowly shifting into recognition. Emily, you're the one who renegotiated the Riverside project last year, aren't you? I nodded once. That was you? Someone else asked quietly. Marcus continued almost half to himself. You were the one who fixed the financing structure when the banks almost pulled out. Yes, I said. There was no pride in my voice, just the simple truth. Across the room, my mother looked like someone had suddenly taken the floor out from under her. That's not exactly how it works, she said weakly. But no one seemed convinced. For years, she had built a social identity around the company, the elegant widow managing the family business, the mother of the daughter who supposedly carried the next generation forward. Now the reality was sitting quietly in the center of the room, and it wasn't the story she had been telling. Lauren tried again, her voice sharper this time. Emily just deals with numbers, she said. That's not the same as actually running things. Marcus looked at her carefully. That's exactly what a CFO does, he replied. The words landed heavier than he probably intended. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the work for me. A few guests quietly picked up their coats. Others began whispering near the hallway. The party atmosphere was dissolving piece by piece. My mother looked around the room, clearly realizing she was losing control of the situation. Emily, she said suddenly, her tone changing, this really isn't the time or place for family misunderstandings. I met her eyes. You're right, I said calmly. Then I glanced toward the banner hanging above the living room. Especially not on my birthday. My words hung in the air for a moment. Especially not on my birthday. A few people glanced toward the banner again, happy birthday, Lauren, and the realization slowly settled across several faces in the room. Marcus Whitman rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I didn't realize today was your birthday, Emily, he said. That's all right, I replied calmly. You weren't supposed to. Across the room, Lauren's confidence had evaporated. She looked from me to Mom, clearly waiting for someone to fix the situation the way it had always been fixed before. But this time there wasn't an easy explanation. My mother stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. Emily, she whispered urgently. We'll talk about this later. You don't need to embarrass the family in front of business partners. I held her gaze for a moment. I'm not embarrassing anyone, I said quietly. I just came to say hello. Behind her, two guests were already quietly gathering their coats. The mood had shifted too much. What had started as a celebration now felt like a room full of people realizing they had been given the wrong story. Lauren crossed her arms. You didn't even get invited, she muttered. That's true, I said. Then I glanced around the living room, the decorations, the catering tables, the polished marble floor. But it's still technically my event. Mom's head snapped toward me. What does that mean? I spoke gently, not loudly, but clearly enough for those closest to hear. It means every payment for this house, this catering company, and those champagne bottles passed through my office. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Because for the first time that evening, everyone understood exactly whose party this had really been. For a moment, no one moved. Not my mother. Not Lauren. Not the guests who had suddenly realized they were standing inside a very uncomfortable truth. Marcus Whitman cleared his throat softly. I think I may have misunderstood a few things tonight, he said carefully. His eyes shifted toward my mother. Patricia, earlier you mentioned Emily wasn't involved in the company. Mom forced a thin smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Well, she handles some financial tasks, she said quickly. Lauren and I focus more on the strategic side. Lauren nodded eagerly beside her. Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked back at me. Emily, he said, just so we're clear, you're the one who signs the financial approvals for Carter Development, correct? Yes, I answered simply. And the Riverside expansion contract? I approve the final structure. And the Whitman Plaza redevelopment loan? That too. Marcus exhaled slowly, almost like a man putting together a puzzle he hadn't realized he was solving. Well, he said, glancing back at the room, that explains a lot. A quiet ripple of understanding moved through the guests. Several of them had worked with Carter Development for years. They had spoken with me on calls, received my emails, negotiated terms through documents carrying my signature. But tonight was the first time many of them had connected that name to the woman standing in the room. Across from me, my mother looked shaken. Lauren looked angry. I didn't feel either. Just steady. Then I checked the time on my watch. 7:54 p.m. I turned back toward them calmly. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm not staying long." My mother stepped forward quickly. "Emily, wait," she said, lowering her voice so only the people closest to us could hear. "You can't just walk in here, create confusion, and leave." Her words might have sounded firm, but the strain in her expression told a different story. I met her eyes calmly. "I didn't create the confusion, Mom." Lauren scoffed softly beside her. "Oh, please," she said. "You're acting like this whole thing revolves around you." I looked at her for a moment before answering. "No," I said gently. "For years it didn't." A few guests shifted awkwardly nearby. Some pretended to examine their phones. Others quietly drifted toward the hallway, sensing the night had changed direction. Marcus Whitman spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Emily," he said, "perhaps we should schedule a meeting this week. There are a few partnership expansions we've been considering." I nodded politely. "Of course." Then I turned back to my mother. "You asked for space earlier today," I reminded her. Her expression tightened. That message was taken out of context. "It was 11 words," I replied calmly. The context seemed clear. Lauren crossed her arms. "So what now?" she asked sharply. "You just show up to make us look bad?" I shook my head. "No." Then I glanced once more around the living room, the decorations, the guests quietly leaving, the half-finished champagne glasses. "I came to say hello," I said. I paused. "And to make sure everyone understood how things actually work." For a moment no one spoke. Then I gave a small nod. "Good night, Mom." I turned toward the door before either of them could respond. Behind me, I could hear the quiet movement of guests gathering their things. The party that had started with music and laughter now carried the awkward hush of people realizing they had stepped into a family story they were never meant to witness. As I walked through the foyer, Marcus Whitman caught up with me. "Emily," he said quietly. I stopped. "I want you to know something," he continued. "Your professionalism over the years has never gone unnoticed. Tonight just clarified a few things." I nodded politely. "I appreciate that, Marcus." He hesitated, then added, "We'll move forward with you directly on the new developments." "That would be best," I said calmly. He offered a small, respectful nod before stepping back toward the living room. Outside, the night air felt cooler than before. The valet brought my car around, but I didn't get in right away. I stood there for a moment looking at the house. Inside those walls, my mother was probably trying to repair the damage to her carefully crafted image. Lauren was likely furious, trying to figure out how everything had shifted so quickly. But none of that felt like my responsibility anymore. For 10 years, I had believed keeping the family comfortable was part of my duty. Tonight made something very clear. Comfort and respect are not the same thing. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. As I pulled away from the curb, my phone lit up on the passenger seat. Blocked numbers. Missed calls trying to push through. The first wave had already started. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts. Just the steady rhythm of the engine and the quiet glow of streetlights passing across the windshield. For years, driving had been the place where I sorted everything out in my head. Business decisions, budgets, contract risks. Tonight my mind was strangely calm. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just clear. When I reached my apartment building, the city had settled into that late evening quiet where traffic thins and windows glow softly above the street. I parked, rode the elevator up, and stepped inside my apartment. The silence there felt different from the silence at the party. This one belonged to me. I set my keys on the counter and walked to the kitchen table where my laptop still sat from earlier that afternoon. For a few seconds, I simply looked at it. 10 years of habits were sitting behind that screen: automatic approvals, routine transfers, systems I had kept running without question. Tonight was the first time I had allowed myself to ask whether those systems were fair. Not to the company. To me. I opened the laptop. The Carter Development Financial Dashboard appeared again, the familiar rows of numbers and account structures filling the screen. My cursor moved slowly across the trackpad. Then I opened the family trust account settings. All the same recurring payments were listed there: house lease, vehicle payments, monthly transfers, credit extensions. Every single one required a signature from the majority shareholder. From me. For 10 years, I had approved them automatically. Tonight, I paused. Then I clicked Review Hold Authorization. And for the first time since my father passed away, I stopped the money from moving. The confirmation window stayed on the screen for a few seconds. Authorized temporary hold on trust distributions? Yes. No. My finger rested on the trackpad. For 10 years, I had clicked approve without hesitation. Transfers, extensions, emergency payments. The system had become automatic, almost invisible. But tonight I read every word carefully. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was a pause. A boundary. I clicked yes. The screen refreshed. A short notification appeared at the top of the page. Hold activated, pending financial review. That was it. No dramatic alert, no flashing red warning. Just a quiet change in the system. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. Across town, nothing had changed yet. The lights in the house were probably still on. A few remaining guests might still be lingering awkwardly. Lauren was likely pacing the living room, angry and confused. But by morning, things would start to look different. The house payment scheduled for the first of the month would fail to process. Lauren's credit card would decline the next time she tried to use it. And the automatic transfers that had quietly supported their lifestyle for a decade would stop. Not forever. Just long enough for something important to happen. Reality. I closed the laptop and carried my father's letter to the bedroom. For the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. Because tonight I hadn't fought anyone. I hadn't argued. I hadn't even raised my voice. I had simply stepped out of a role that was never meant to last forever. I slept through the night. That might not sound remarkable, but for the first time in years, my mind didn't wake me up at 2 a.m. to check emails or replay conversations in my head. The apartment was quiet when I opened my eyes the next morning. Sunlight slipped across the floor, warming the edge of the bed. For a moment, everything felt still. Then I remembered what I had done the night before. The hold on the family trust. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up instantly. 99 plus missed calls. Most of them from blocked numbers trying to get through. Mom. Lauren. A few unfamiliar numbers too, probably borrowed phones once they realized their calls weren't reaching me. I unlocked the phone slowly. Voicemails filled the screen. The earliest ones were sharp and impatient. Emily, call me back. There's something wrong with the account. My card just declined. But the messages grew different as the night went on. Less anger. More confusion. And finally, sometime around 3 in the morning, Lauren's voice strained, almost panicked. Emily, please call me. Something's wrong with the bank. I set the phone back down beside me. Not with satisfaction. Just with clarity. For 10 years, I had quietly supported their lives without ever asking what it was costing me. Last night, for the first time, I stopped carrying that weight alone. And sometimes that's all a boundary really is. Not punishment. Not revenge. Just the moment you finally choose to stand in your own life instead of disappearing inside someone else's. If this story meant something to you, stay with us. Strength grows here.